Okay, so what do we mean by the media? Well, the media is all around us. We're being constantly bombarded by textual and visual imagery. And with technology advancing so quickly, we're now able to watch films on the internet or even on our mobile phones. And with the popularity of reality TV, for example, we're not just passively watching the TV anymore. We are actually in it. Okay, so now for the really boring bit. In order to study media, we need to focus on these certain key concepts. The key concepts are representation, ideology, narrative, genre, institution, audience, and media language. Okay, back to you, Adam.
The method of presenting reality in the media is called representation. This is a key concept. All the media forms we study we refer to as media texts. Representation is the representation of visual images or facts by the media through a constructed reality. This reality may contain a political or social agenda. Or it may be constructed so people are persuaded to buy a product or a service, such as in advertising. Does representation matter? Yes, because negative representations can lead to individuals or groups of people being excluded or being labelled as threatening. Positive representations could be said to promote tolerance and a more harmonious society. The questions to ask when analysing a text are: who is being represented in the text? How are they being represented? Who has produced the text? Why are they being represented in this way? And how accurate is the representation? We're going to address these questions to a case study involving the representation of the two main political parties at the last general election. Right, let's start with my particular favourite, the Daily Mirror. Okay, let's look at what we have. The first question we have to ask is who is being represented in the text. We have Michael Howard, the leader of the Tory party in the last general election. And he's depicted as Dracula, lying in a coffin with a stake through the heart. Here we have Intertextuality. It's a dramatic image, a parody of a Hammer horror poster of the 1970s, making it instantly recognisable. It clearly suggests a political bias towards the Labour Party, as the headline instructs the reader to vote Labour. The use of blood-soaked writing and imagery signifying distrust of Mr. Howard and his party's politics. Unlike broadcasting, which is strictly regulated, publishing is more prone to producing propaganda, especially at important times such as elections, and here this can be clearly seen. Right, we have something rather unusual. The whole of the front cover has been dedicated to the main news story, demonstrating the importance of the ideological message, vote Labour, taking up 1/8 of the page. Having such a dominant image with a shared meaning ensures a preferred reading. The composition of the picture is striking. The reader is looking directly down into the coffin, drawn by the protruding stake to the focus of the carefully constructed image. The use of the mythical character of Dracula could highlight Mr. Howard's immigrant ancestry and add to distrust of his policies. The black humour of the strapline, "There's too much at stake," reinforcing the message of the image. Why are they being represented in this way? The connotations from this image suggest we must vote for the Labour Party because the alternative is an unimaginable horror. The use of Dracula is interesting and it is familiar to everyone and could suggest that the Tory policies are a myth, rather like the character of Dracula. Who has produced the text? The Daily Mirror has been established for over 100 years. It prides itself on questioning the status quo and standing up to the establishment. It is now part of the Trinity Mirror plc group of companies. Also, it's one of the big four, selling half of the 71 million papers sold in the UK every week. This is a very powerful institution that is clearly producing propaganda in the form of an ideological discourse in favour of the Labour Party. How accurate is the representation? The representation cannot be considered accurate as it doesn't give a balanced view of who to vote for. Just for a moment, let's contrast the Daily Mirror and front page of The Independent. The Independent has an unbiased headline, The Final Reckoning, and a table showing the pros and cons of each of the three main parties. The difference between this and the Mirror is striking. Let's look at the same story from the election of 2005 on the Daily Express front page. First of all, we can see that the election doesn't dominate the whole page, but just takes up half a page. We are going to concentrate on the election headline. Who is being represented in the text? Rather like the Daily Mirror, we have a doctored image, this time of Tony Blair as Pinocchio, the fairy tale boy who was a puppet and wanted to become a real boy. How are they being represented? Let's look at the image first. The choice of Pinocchio could symbolise several things. It has obvious connotations of lies and of distrust of anything he says personally. The choice of Pinocchio is also interesting as the fairy tale character is wooden, and this could signify that Tony Blair is also wooden in nature and cannot empathise with the British people. Also being symbolised as a puppet could suggest he's easily manipulated, such as past news stories have indicated of his relationship with President Bush. The headline anchoring the picture invites the reader to find out why the paper doesn't think we should vote Tony Blair in for another 5 years. We have a play on language with Tony Blair's name. Note, it's misspelt as Blier, suggesting liar. This language, although biased, is not as direct as the Daily Mirror. It leaves room for the reader to decide for themselves from the evidence, suggesting the audience of this newspaper is more sophisticated than the Daily Mirror, as it tries to reason with the reader rather than just telling the audience not to vote for Michael Howard. Notice that with the Independent, equal space is given to each of the three political parties. I do realise that sometimes exam questions ask you to analyse content you may find a little boring. Do not let this put you off. The rules are the same. Make sure you look closely at the text and always give evidence to back up your points. Negative stereotypes. Why is this important? Because if we as society accept representations which just focus on the detrimental aspects of those being depicted, they will become negative stereotypes. Stereotypes categorise people in terms of exaggerated characteristics. These representations make assumptions about individuals that can be negative. Negative stereotypes could also lead to an acceptance of an ideology reinforced by the media which is wrong. An ideology is a set of values or beliefs that society holds. For example, all blonde women are stupid. This could lead to discrimination against women being promoted in the workplace if they are represented as weak or just homemakers, or simply sex objects like those in the red tops. In 1975, Laura Mulvey argued that Hollywood's dominant point of view is masculine. Females are displayed for the male gaze, providing erotic pleasure and voyeurism. Feminists suggest that this is detrimental to women as it promotes the fantasy of willingness, or in other words, women are just here to pleasure men. Characteristics such as a breathy voice, revealing clothes, reliance on men, are the clues or codes which are the key to what connotations or meanings the text is suggesting. Let's just stop and look at the definition of connotation. A connotation is the meaning that we interpret from signs we pick up from texts. This term originates from semiotics. Semiotics is the language of meaning. We have the signifier, or the physical form, for example, this guy. We have signified the meaning we derive from the physical form. The signifier stays the same, but the signified changes. As we can see, this guy could be a terrorist to one group of people, but could also mean or signify a freedom fighter to another group of people. The representation of women has been challenged, especially in the genre of science fiction. The character of Sarah Connor in Terminator in the 1980s, and especially Terminator 2, marked a new kind of representation emerging. Gone is the demure, indecisive, vulnerable character. Here, the key signifier, Sarah, is the tough warrior, protecting her son, the saviour of the human race against the machines and imminent dystopia. Note her appearance has changed. Her body shape in Terminator 2 compared to Terminator 1 appears muscular. Her clothes have a military style and her attitude demonstrates a lack of care for how she looks. She is focused on the task and is the leader rather than the led. Representations of gender are changing, but most still tend to be traditional. Why don't you do your own case study? Yes, I know, you'd rather sit there and just watch me doing all the work. Watch an hour of one of the commercial stations such as ITV. Draw up a chart like so. List every advertisement you see within this time period, who's in the ad and what the role of the male or female is. Follow our example. Think about whether mouldy applies or if the representation is challenging, taking a different view than the traditional female. And most importantly, why you think this is. What is the evidence? You can use this information in your exam answers if they apply. Do this to back up your argument, but you must give the name of the product or service and give evidence to back up your argument. Description alone will not give you a good grade. You must give detailed examples as evidence to back up your argument. Back up your argument. Narrative definition. Put simply, this is the process and construction of stories in the media by the use of characters, settings, themes, and imagery. But these aren't just the components of a story. They can also be part of the codes that create meaning in a text. Genre and narrative generally go together, as narrative codes can suggest a particular genre to an audience. Narrative is how we tell a story. The way in which a story is told can signify a particular genre, auteur, or institution. Storytelling isn't anything new. It has been part of society's culture since the beginning of humanity, from the pictorial narrative of the Spanish cave paintings of Lascaux to the ancient tales of Middle-earth from Norse mythology. These are still being told to us today through the writings of Tolkien in Lord of the Rings. From the exam perspective, we need to analyse the narrative in terms of theme, what ideology is dominant? How is the narrative structured? Who is telling the story? How is the audience drawn into the text? How are the heroes and villains created? How are sound, music, genre, iconography, editing, mise-en-scène all used to convey the meaning of the text? A theme is the subject matter of a text. For example, love, revenge, racism, jealousy, adoption. Generally, in most media texts, there is a dominant theme with others interwoven into the background. However, there are no set rules for this, but it's important to be able to identify the theme or themes. The theme is important because it sets the scene. An ideology is a set of values or beliefs that society holds. For example, in the past, black people have mainly been depicted in the media as funny, athletic, dependent, or criminals. This could lead to a false perception of black people in general. Although we have a better representation emerging, representations are not always positive. For example, in British soaps, the ethnic minorities are still the shopkeepers and the young black character is usually portrayed as the troublemaker. How is the narrative structured? Here we have two main options. Generally, the format will either be linear or non-linear. A linear story is structured in a straight line, so it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and doesn't jump from the future to the past. This is the traditional method of storytelling. A non-linear format travels back and forward in time throughout the story. A good example of this structure is demonstrated in the film Pulp Fiction. Who is telling the story? Through whose eyes are we as an audience viewing the story? Is the story told in the first person, where the audience sees through the eyes of the narrator who talks directly to us? Or is the story told in the third person, which is more distant as we watch the story unfold without being addressed directly? These two concepts, although straightforward, can make an enormous difference in the way an audience will empathise with the characters depicted. First person helps us to identify with the character as we are drawn into the story and feel their pain or pleasure, because our focus is not diluted by several different stories at the same time. For example, the internal monologue of Sarah in Terminator 2 helps the audience empathise with her as a mother, a woman, and a representative of the human race facing dystopia. We as the audience are her confidant and as such are drawn inexplicably into the plot. Newspapers use this technique a lot with disaster stories. A particular person's plight is highlighted so the pain is accentuated, and we as a mother, father, sister, brother can identify directly with the plight of the victim. For example, take this headline from The Sun telling of the recent Asian earthquake. You can hear kids crying under rubble. The emphasis here is on the word kids. If you're a parent, this could really hit home. It could be your kids dying. If the newspaper wants to create a moral panic, we are given a story purely on the effects of a situation rather than the cause. The people behind the story are stereotyped and generalised, creating a collective monster, so we as an audience are distanced. For example, look at this headline from the Sunday Express. In this case, the monster with many heads is Islamic extremism. Terror swoop begins. Dozens of undesirables to be rounded up and detained within days. How are heroes and villains created? Well, these are created by carefully crafted representations constructed by writers using codes and conventions. These encourage the audience to associate particular characteristics with good and bad characters. Producers can use the narrative of each production to highlight the hero and the villain, but they may also use the brand image of particular stars. For example, Tom Cruise is usually depicted as the hero, so the audience knows what to expect before even sitting down to watch the film. When this tradition is broken and the actor plays the villain instead of the hero, the effect can be quite dramatic and confusing, as the audience still wants to like the guy who normally plays the hero. This was demonstrated well when Tom Cruise played the villain in the film Collateral. Theorists such as Prop examined folk tales and argued that it was possible to categorise characters into 8 roles and 31 narrative functions. The characters are the villain, the hero who is seeking something. This character can be male or female. The donor, who provides magical assistance or an object to help the hero. The dispatcher, who sends the hero on the quest. The false hero, who puts stumbling blocks in the way for the hero. The helper, who aids the hero. The father, who rewards the hero. And the princess, who is the object of the villain's plans, but also the reward for the success of the hero. Although a very traditional approach to the framework of a narrative, it can still be recognised in some modern media texts, although it cannot comply with some modern narratives in which all the characters are bad, but to varying degrees, such as in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction or Kill Bill. Another model that has been applied to the creation of heroes and villains is Todorov's. He suggested that the majority of stories start with a state of equilibrium or order, where life is normal and the protagonist is content. An outside force then disrupts this state of equilibrium, and then the remainder of the narrative is concerned with doing whatever is necessary to return to that state of equilibrium. When applying Todorov's theory to modern-day media, heroes and villains are created by the state of equilibrium being disrupted. This includes their part in it and the role they play in the eventual return to normality. Again, this is an effective model with text, but in a lot of cases, modern texts don't conform with it. This could be due to the increase in competition between media texts for profits. Sometimes shock beginnings and endings are used to differentiate between homogenized formats, so there is no state of equilibrium. For example, in the Steven Spielberg film Saving Private Ryan, the film begins with the horrific slaughter of soldiers on the beach. Of course, one could argue that this slaughter was the state of normality for the life of a soldier. One could further argue that the idea of a state of equilibrium is subjective, so modern texts could be viewed by applying narrative models such as Todorov's. When analysing these aspects, students sometimes learn stock answers for particular types of texts and end up describing what the music is, iconography, etc., etc. However, this will keep your mark down. Use our examples as a springboard to detailed analysis. Look at each aspect individually, tell the examiner how they are used and what the connotations are. Next, we're going to talk about genre. Genre is the French word for category or type. We have many genres within the media, such as cowboy films, horrors, soaps, and so on. The media use genre as a way of aiding audience expectations by ensuring the production contains certain recognizable codes and conventions. For example, codes and conventions in a cowboy film, iconic codes, visual codes, cowboy hats, desert, guns, stagecoach, saloon bars, whiskey, cards. Recurring narrative themes are also codes and conventions. Wronged man proves his innocence. Family killed, man seeks vengeance. Lone rider saves village from bandits. Identification is strengthened at times by particular actors being associated with certain genres. For example, Clint Eastwood instantly triggers off connotations of westerns. Bruce Willis and Arnold Schwarzenegger with action films. However, describing genre in this way is quite simplistic, as we have crossover genres. These are demonstrated in films such as Shaun of the Dead, a horror comedy film. Also, genres evolve over time. For example, a genre that has evolved from documentaries is reality TV. Once a genre is established, formats emerge which attract particular audiences. Genre is a method to target audiences, building up a fan base and making money. Star Trek and Doctor Who are prime examples of this. The mixture of different genres in the media has led to intertextuality. This is when a media text is referenced within another media text. Excellent examples of this are the spoof horror or disaster films that are a conglomerated parody of all films within that genre, films such as Scary Movie. Genre applies to all media output. Look at a selection of magazines of a particular genre, such as rock magazines. Ask yourself what characteristics they have in common. Is this how you know what music magazine you want to buy? What appeals to you? Is it the layout, the star interviews, the language? Ask yourself why. Remember, the audience, that's you as well, is a consumer carefully targeted by the media. So far, we have looked at representation and genre. We have touched on stereotypes, media language, ideology, and audience. Next, I'm going to show you how to analyse a magazine front. I must stress, although I'm going to use the key concepts, your analysis will not necessarily be the same as mine. This is fine, as long as you focus on the concepts asked for in your examination question and back up your answer with evidence. Before we start, analysis is not about the following: just copying other people's analysis, describing without evaluating, using terminology because you've learnt it, and if you don't write it down in the exam, it would have been such a waste of your time learning it, using terminology wrongly just because you think it sounds good. Analysis is about you personally engaging with the text, but with a structured response. using the key concepts as your framework for exploring and evaluating the text, ensuring you use examples to back up your points. Provide an analysis of the following text. You should focus your analysis on media language, representation, and media audiences. Your first job is to identify the key signifier or key signifiers. In other words, the images or words that stand out and catch your attention. The cover is very busy or full of imagery and text. The main key signifier is the image of the soldier and the word kill zone. The next thing to do is write notes under the key concepts mentioned in the question. First, let's look at media language. This is not, as some students believe, centred on the text only. The media language is the way in which the layout, structure, text and imagery converge to convey a message to the audience. It is also the way in which a message has been encoded by the producers to appeal to a target audience or convey a particular ideology. So let's examine the text under this heading. Here we have a traditional layout. Title at the top with the main story dominantly in the centre, Kill Zone. Text creates credibility by stating it's the official magazine, the best-selling PlayStation magazine, and the only mag with playable demos. The font used for the title is also credible because it helps establish the brand image. Note the same use on the demo disc pictured in the bottom left corner. The overall appearance of the cover is in the genre of the glossy magazine. A quality production should be reinforced by the quality of print and the tie-in of reviews of the latest games. The colours are vibrant with an array of fonts used to emphasise certain text in order of importance. The graphics are varied but clear and subtly designed. This is backed up by the price, £5.99 at the top right of the page, a premium price for a quality publication. The main image is connected to the main story, the exclusive review of Killzone, with the underlying comment, "War is here," suggesting that the audience, as part of the readership, has been awaiting this review with anticipation. The image depicts a soldier in virtual battle, the exploding gun depicting action and excitement. We can't see the eyes of the soldier, just goggles reflecting the red glow of battle fire. The shape of the helmet and air tubes connote that the soldier could be alien-looking, more like a character from Star Wars than a modern-day soldier. Well, this has connotations of a fantasy character from a virtual world that the reader is being invited to enter. Okay, so we have very masculine imagery here. Notice there are no females on the cover. The soldier and even the smaller images only have men and cars. Boys are tough and macho. The main body of the cover is red and yellow with a dark image of the soldier signifying action, intense combat emphasised by the gun being shown as firing in the heat of battle. Constructing codes of behaviour, giving guidance for boys and youth that they would be tough and offer macho excitement. Text creates credibility by stating it is the official magazine, the best-selling PlayStation magazine, and the only mag with playable demos. It reinforces the ideology that boys should be tough and enjoy war games and fast cars. All the games mentioned on the cover are macho games, GTA, The Getaway, etc., etc. It also reinforces the ideology of patriotism by the use of war imagery. Now the media audience. The audience are those who consume a particular media product. For example, you are the audience of this DVD, or you could be part of the audience for a particular music channel. First, do not assume that only the very young play on PlayStations. Get your clues from whatever production you are looking at, not just your opinion on who should be reading this magazine. So let's start by looking at the clues. The tone of the magazine. It's glossy. It's got a sophisticated layout, strong imagery, reviewing games attracting teenagers. Also, look at the iconography of cars and games that are for the older age group. The games featured possibly suggest an audience who are attracted to the science fiction genre. Note the inclusion of games such as Star Wars and Killzone. Also, fans of thriller action games, for example The Getaway and Burnout. This is an example of the male audience special interest genre. Costing £5.99, this magazine is expensive. although the demo disc helps make it appear better value. We could say, because of the price, that using the social scale, those who could most afford it would be the ABC ones. However, this could be misleading. PlayStation magazine, according to the Audit Bureau of Circulation, is one of the most bought consumer magazines. Boys are targeted using macho imagery and claims of exclusivity and incentives, such as the free demo games and PS2 cheat book.